The bitter wind cut through the Rocky Mountains like a blade forged in hell itself, carrying with it the promise of snow and the whisper of death. November in Colorado Territory was unforgiving, and the jagged peaks that scraped the gray sky seemed to mock any fool desperate enough to traverse them without proper preparation. Jake Morrison was such a fool. His horse had given out 3 days ago, collapsing in a heap of foam and exhaustion near Dead Man's Creek. Jake had put the mare out of her misery with his last bullet, then shouldered what little he could carry, and pressed on through terrain that would challenge even the most seasoned mountain men. His boots were worn through at the soles, his coat torn and inadequate against the plummeting temperatures, and the fever that had been building in his chest now made each breath feel like swallowing broken glass. "Should have died with the ranch," he muttered through cracked lips, stumbling over a fallen log. His words came out in white puffs that disappeared instantly in the merciless air. Should have died with everything else. 3 months ago, Jake Morrison had owned the finest cattle operation in the San Luis Valley. 3 months ago, he'd had 200 head of prime beef, a sturdy homestead, and plans to ask Sarah Beth Williams for her hand come spring. 3 months ago, he'd been somebody. Then came the rustlers, the drought and the banker's notice. One by one, they'd stripped away everything he'd built with his own hands and his father's legacy. The cattle vanished in the night. The wells ran dry. The loan came due with interest that seemed to multiply like locusts. When the smoke cleared, Jake Morrison was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and a horse that wouldn't last the week. Now, even the horse was gone. He'd been wandering these mountains for near a week, following old mining trails that led nowhere, driven by some stubborn refusal to simply lay down and die. But as the afternoon light began to fade behind the snow-heavy clouds, Jake felt that stubborn streak finally beginning to crack. His knees buckled, sending him tumbling into a drift of powder snow that immediately soaked through his threadbare pants. The fever made everything shimmer and dance at the edges of his vision, and when he tried to push himself back to his feet, his arms gave out completely. "This is it then," he gasped, rolling onto his back to stare up at the darkening sky. Snow began to fall in lazy, fat flakes that landed on his face like cold kisses. This is where Jake Morrison's story ends. But the mountains had other plans. The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the whistle of wind, accompanied by a low, gravelly voice that seemed to emerge from the wilderness itself. "Easy there, Buck. Easy now." Jake tried to lift his head, but the world tilted dangerously. Through the curtain of falling snow, he glimpsed a massive figure on horseback wrapped in furs and leather, with a beard as wild and grey as winter storm clouds. "Well, I'll be damned," the voice rumbled. "What fool thing are you doing up here, boy?" "Dying, I reckon," Jake croaked. The mountain man dismounted with surprising grace for his size, leading his horse closer. Up close, Jake could see he was built like a grizzly bear, with hands large enough to crush a man's skull and eyes the color of river ice. But there was something else in those eyes, something that might have been compassion. "Not on my mountain, you ain't." The stranger knelt beside Jake, pulling off a heavy glove to press the back of his hand against Jake's forehead. "Christ almighty, boy, you're burning up. How long you been wandering up here?" "Lost count," Jake whispered. "Don't matter now. Matters to me." The mountain man stood, whistling sharply. From somewhere behind the curtain of snow came an answering call, lighter, sweeter, a woman's voice. "Pa, you find something?" "Found us a half-dead fool, Emma," the man called back. "Bring the travois." Within minutes, a young woman emerged from the swirling snow, leading a second horse that dragged a simple wooden sledge. She moved with the easy confidence of someone born to mountain life, her auburn hair braided tight against the wind, her green eyes sharp with intelligence and concern. "Lord have mercy," she breathed, dropping to her knees beside Jake. "Pa, he's barely breathing. He'll breathe plenty once we get him warm and fed." The mountain man's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Help me get him on the travois, girl. Gentle now." As they lifted him, Jake caught a glimpse of the woman's face. Emma, her father had called her. She was beautiful in the way wild things were beautiful, untamed and fierce, but her touch was gentle as she arranged a thick buffalo robe around his shivering form. "What's your name, mister?" she asked softly. "Jake," he managed. "Jake Morrison." "Well, Jake Morrison, I'm Emma Fletcher, and this mountain of a man is my pa Ezra. You're safe now." Safe. The word seemed foreign after so many months of loss and wandering. As consciousness began to slip away, Jake felt himself being pulled through the snow, heard the steady crunch of boots and hooves, felt the first warmth he'd known in weeks seeping through the buffalo robe. "Why?" he whispered, though he wasn't sure if anyone could hear him over the wind. But Ezra Fletcher's voice came back clear and strong. "Because that's what decent folks do for each other up here, son. The mountain don't care about your past mistakes. All that matters is you're alive, and we aim to keep you that way." As they descended into a protected valley Jake hadn't even known existed, he caught his first glimpse of the Fletcher homestead, a sturdy log cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, a barn that had weathered countless storms, and corrals that held horses as wild and free as their owners. It looked like salvation itself, and for the first time in 3 months, Jake Morrison dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over after all. Jake Morrison woke to the sound of crackling fire and the rich aroma of coffee brewing. For a moment, suspended between sleep and consciousness, he thought he might be dead. Surely this warmth, this comfort, couldn't be real after so many nights of cold and hunger. Then came the coughing fit. His chest seized like a bear trap closing, each hack tearing through his lungs and leaving him gasping. Strong hands helped him sit up, and he found himself looking into Emma Fletcher's concerned green eyes. "Easy now," she murmured, holding a tin cup to his lips. "Just sip. It's pine needle tea. Pa swears it'll break up whatever's settled in your chest." The tea was bitter as sin but warmed him from the inside out. Jake managed a few careful swallows before his breathing steadied enough to take in his surroundings. He was lying on a thick mattress near the stone fireplace of the Fletcher cabin, wrapped in more blankets than he'd owned in his entire life. The interior was simple but solid. Hand-hewn furniture that would outlast generations, shelves lined with preserves and dried herbs, and rifles hanging over the mantel like sentinels. "How long?" His voice came out as a croak. 3 days, Emma replied, settling into a wooden chair beside his makeshift bed. "You've been burning with fever and talking to people who ain't here. Pa was starting to worry we might lose you." Through the small window, Jake could see snow still falling, but gently now, like a blessing rather than a curse. The storm that had nearly killed him had passed, leaving the world outside wrapped in pristine white. "Where is your pa?" "Tending the horses. We've got 12 head in the corrals, all of them wilder than March wind when we found them. Pa has a way with broken things, horses, people." She paused, studying his face. "Says you remind him of a stallion he once found, half dead from wolf bites. That horse was so angry at the world he tried to kick down the barn, but once he healed up proper, he became the finest mount Pa ever owned." Jake tried to sit up straighter and immediately regretted it as the world tilted sideways. Emma's hand was instantly on his shoulder, steadying him. "Don't be trying to stand just yet. You lost more weight than a man can spare, and that fever's only just broken. Another day or 2 of rest, then we'll see about getting you back on your feet." The cabin door burst open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and the massive frame of Ezra Fletcher. The mountain man stomped his boots clean and hung his coat on a peg before turning his ice-blue gaze on Jake. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Ezra rumbled, though there was warmth in his voice. "Thought you might sleep through the whole winter, son." "Sorry to be such trouble, Mr. Fletcher." "Ezra, and you ain't trouble." The big man lowered himself into a chair that creaked under his weight. "Emma tells me you've been ranching down in the valley." Jake's jaw tightened. "Had a ranch. Lost it. Rustlers?" "Among other things." Jake didn't want to talk about it, but something in Ezra's steady gaze compelled honesty. "Drought took the grass. Rustlers took half the herd. Bank took the rest when I couldn't make payment. 3 generations of Morrison sweat and blood gone like smoke." Ezra nodded slowly. "I know that song, boy. Sung it myself once upon a time." Emma glanced between the 2 men, sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. "Pa, before we came to this mountain, we had us a place down near Denver. Not as grand as what you're describing, but it was ours. Emma's ma died birthing her, and I thought work would cure the grieving. Threw everything I had into making that little spread something special." The mountain man's voice grew distant. "Then the war came. While I was off playing soldier, claim jumpers moved in. When I got back, they had papers saying the land was theirs, legal-like. Papers bought with Union gold, most likely." "What did you do?" Jake asked. Ezra's smile was grim. "What any man would do. I fought. Lost. Nearly got myself and Emma killed in the process." He looked toward the window where the snow continued its gentle descent. "So I loaded up what we could carry and headed for the high country. Been here 8 years now, and ain't nobody bothered us since. The difference, Emma interjected softly, is that Pa learned to be grateful for what the mountain gave us, instead of mourning what the valley took away. Her words hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd been so consumed with his losses that he'd forgotten to look for what remained. Life, health, or the promise of it returning, and now, inexplicably, the kindness of strangers who owed him nothing. Over the next week, Jake's strength slowly returned. Emma proved to be a capable nurse, bringing him meals of venison stew and cornbread, checking his temperature with the back of her hand, and changing the poultices she applied to his chest. But she was more than just a caretaker. She was intelligent, funny, and possessed of an inner strength that rivaled her father's physical power. "You ever miss it?" Jake asked one evening as she helped him walk around the cabin. His legs were still unsteady, but each day brought improvement. Miss what? Civilization, towns, other people. Emma considered this, pausing by the window to watch the horses moving through the corral like ghosts in the moonlight. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to wear a proper dress to a church social, or to have lady friends to talk with about things Pa don't understand." She smiled. "But then I think about the freedom we have up here. No one telling us how to live, what to think, who to be. The mountain don't judge you for wearing men's clothes or speaking your mind, or choosing to shoot a rifle instead of learning to embroider. You know how to shoot. Better than Pa, though don't tell him I said so." Her laugh was like silver bells in the wind. "Mountain life don't leave room for helpless flowers, Jake Morrison. Up here everyone pulls their weight or they don't survive." As his second week at the ranch began, Jake finally felt strong enough to venture outside. The cold hit his lungs like a slap, but it was clean and sharp, nothing like the fevered struggle for breath he'd endured. Ezra was working in the corral with a bay stallion that clearly wanted nothing to do with human company. "Easy, King," Ezra murmured, holding a lead rope while the horse danced and snorted. "Nobody's going to hurt you, old son." Jake watched from the fence rail, impressed despite himself. The mountain man moved with infinite patience, never forcing the issue, letting the horse come to its own understanding that he meant no harm. "That one's been fighting us for 2 months now," Emma said, joining Jake at the fence. "Pa found him caught in a deadfall trap, leg torn up, something fierce. He was so wild with pain and fear that we had to rope him just to treat the wound. He healing up good?" "Oh, the leg's fine now, but his trust in humans—" She shook her head. "That's taking longer to mend." Jake understood. Trust, once broken, was the hardest thing to rebuild. "Your pa's got the right idea, though. Can't force it. Has to come natural or it ain't worth having." Emma glanced at him sharply, and Jake realized they weren't just talking about horses anymore. Color rose in her cheeks, and she looked away quickly, but not before he caught the flash of something deeper in her green eyes. "Jake," she said quietly, "when you're feeling stronger, when you're ready to leave this mountain, what will you do? Where will you go?" It was a question he'd been avoiding, but now it hung between them like morning mist, impossible to ignore. Where would he go? What did a broken-down cowboy with no money, no land, and no prospects do with the rest of his life? For the first time since losing everything, Jake Morrison found himself hoping that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to figure that out alone. In the corral, Ezra finally managed to slip the halter over King's head. The stallion stood trembling but accepting, and the mountain man's weathered face broke into a grin of pure satisfaction. "See that?" he called to Jake and Emma. "Sometimes all it takes is showing a broken thing that not everyone's looking to hurt it. Give it time, patience, and a reason to trust again." Jake met Emma's eyes and saw his own hope reflected there. Perhaps he wasn't the only one learning to trust again. By his 4th week on the mountain, Jake Morrison had traded his invalid's blankets for work clothes and calloused hands. The fever was a distant memory now, replaced by the satisfying ache of honest labor. Each dawn found him in the corrals alongside Ezra, mending fences, breaking ice on water troughs, and gentling horses that had forgotten what it meant to trust human kindness. "You got a good seat," Ezra observed one morning, watching Jake work with a young mare that had been skittish around men. "Most cowboys I've known are all force and no finesse. You read the animal first." Jake guided the mare through her paces, his voice low and steady. "My pa always said you can't cowboy a horse into cooperation. Got to convince them it's their idea." "Smart man, your pa." "He was." Jake's voice carried the weight of old grief. "Died when I was 17, left me the ranch and a mountain of debt. Took me 10 years to dig out from under it, another 5 to build something worthwhile. His jaw tightened. All gone now. Ezra leaned against the fence rail, his ice-blue eyes thoughtful. You blame yourself for losing it? Who else is there to blame? Drought, rustlers, banks that loan money they hope you can't repay. The mountain man's voice was matter of fact. Sometimes a man does everything right and still loses, son. That don't make it his fault. Before Jake could respond, Emma emerged from the cabin carrying a steaming pot of coffee and tin cups. She'd taken to joining them for these morning conversations, and Jake found himself looking forward to her presence more than he should. You two solving the world's problems again? She asked, pouring coffee all around. Just trying to beat some sense into this stubborn cowboy's head, Ezra replied with a grin. He's convinced himself that losing his ranch makes him a failure. Emma handed Jake his cup, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent warmth shooting up his arm that had nothing to do with the hot coffee. Seems to me, she said carefully, that a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he does when he's got nothing left. Jake met her eyes and saw something there that made his heart stumble. And what's that supposed to mean? Means you could have laid down and died in that snowdrift. Instead, you're out here every morning, working harder than any hired hand we ever had, never asking for wages or complaining about the cold. Her cheeks flushed pink, but she held his gaze. Seems to me that shows more character than owning 1,000 head of cattle ever could. Ezra watched this exchange with growing interest, his weathered face creasing into what might have been a smile. Emma's got a point. Question is, what are you planning to do with all that character, Jake Morrison? It was a question that had been eating at Jake for weeks. He was stronger now, healthy enough to leave the mountain and make his own way. But the thought of walking away from this place, from Emma, felt like dying all over again. I've been thinking, he said slowly. Maybe I could stay on. Work for you, I mean. Earn my keep proper-like. We don't have money to pay hired help, Ezra said bluntly. Don't need money. Just need a purpose. Jake set down his coffee cup and faced the mountain man squarely. You saved my life, Ezra. Both of you did. I'd like to repay that debt. Debt? Emma's voice was sharp with something that sounded like hurt. Is that all this is to you? An obligation? Jake realized he'd chosen his words poorly, but before he could explain, a commotion erupted in the main corral. King, the bay stallion they'd been working with, was rearing and striking at something near the water trough. The other horses scattered, whinnying in alarm. Mountain cat, Ezra breathed, reaching for his rifle. Jake saw it too, a tawny shadow slinking between the fence rails, hunger driving it to risk the enclosed space. The big cat was thin, desperate, and eyeing the horses like a predator sizing up prey. Without thinking, Jake vaulted the fence and strode toward the cougar, his hands empty, but his voice carrying absolute authority. Get on out of here, cat. These horses aren't for you. Jake, don't be a fool. Emma's voice cracked like a whip, but he kept walking. The cougar turned toward this new threat, muscles bunching for a spring. Jake could see the desperation in its yellow eyes, the prominent ribs showing through its winter coat. It was starving, which made it more dangerous than any healthy predator. Easy now, Jake murmured, the same tone he used with spooked horses. I know you're hungry, but this ain't the answer. Move along now. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, man and beast regarded each other. Then, as if recognizing something implacable in Jake's stance, the cougar turned and melted back through the fence, disappearing into the timber like smoke. Jake stood motionless until he was sure the cat was truly gone, then walked back to where Ezra and Emma waited. Both were staring at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. That, Ezra said finally, was either the bravest thing I ever saw or the stupidest. Both, probably. Jake's hands were shaking now that the danger had passed, but his voice stayed steady. Couldn't let it hurt the horses. Emma stepped close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. You could have been killed. So could you if that cat had decided to come at the cabin instead of the corral. He met her eyes, seeing fear there, and anger, and something deeper that made his chest tight. I won't let anything happen to you, Emma. Not while I've got breath in my body. The words hung in the cold mountain air like a vow. Emma's lips parted as if to speak, but Ezra's gruff voice cut through the moment. Well then, the mountain man said slowly, I reckon that settles it. Settles what? Jake asked. The question of whether you're staying on. Ezra's grin was fierce with approval. Any man willing to face down a hungry cougar to protect what's ours is welcome at my table, and by my fire for as long as he chooses to stay. Jake felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't realized was there. "You mean that?" "I mean it." Ezra clapped a massive hand on Jake's shoulder. "Besides, Emma's right. You work harder than any 3 hired hands, and you've got something most cowboys don't." "What's that?" "Heart. The kind that sees what needs protecting and steps up to do it, whether it's convenient or not." That evening, as they sat around the fireplace sharing a supper of venison and Emma's cornbread, Jake felt something he'd thought lost forever: belonging. The conversation flowed easy between them, punctuated by Emma's laughter and Ezra's gruff observations about mountain life. When Ezra finally headed to his bedroom, muttering about old bones and warm blankets, Jake found himself alone with Emma for the first time since his arrival. She was mending a shirt by lamplight, her needle flashing in the golden glow. "Thank you," he said quietly. She looked up from her sewing. "For what?" "For making me feel like I might be worth something again." Emma set down her work and moved to the chair beside his. "Jake Morrison, you listen to me. You were worth something the day Pa and I pulled you out of that snow. You were worth something when you lost your ranch, and you were worth something when you thought you had nothing left to give." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers small but strong against his palm. "The ranch didn't make you who you are. The cattle didn't make you brave or kind or willing to risk your life for animals that aren't even yours. Those things were already inside you." Jake turned his hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. "Emma, I know it's not proper," she said quickly, her cheeks flaming. "A woman shouldn't speak so forward, especially to a man she's only known a few weeks. But up here, we don't have time for the usual courtesies. Winter's too short, and life's too uncertain." Jake lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "What are you trying to say, Emma Fletcher?" She met his eyes with the same fierce courage she'd inherited from her father. "I'm saying I love you, Jake Morrison. And if you'll have me, if you'll stay on this mountain and help us build something lasting, then I'd be honored to spend whatever time the good Lord gives us, making a life together." Jake felt his heart crack open like ice in spring, flooding him with warmth and possibility and hope he'd thought buried forever. Outside, the wind howled through the peaks, but inside this cabin, beside this woman, he'd found something worth more than any ranch he'd ever owned. "Emma Fletcher," he said, bringing her hand to his lips again, "it would be my honor to spend the rest of my days earning the right to be called yours." In the firelight, her smile was brighter than any sunrise he'd ever seen. Spring arrived on Fletcher Mountain like a whispered prayer answered. Snow melted into rushing streams, wildflowers painted the meadows in brilliant colors, and the air carried the sweet promise of new beginnings. Jake Morrison stood at the edge of the clearing where he and Emma would be married, watching the sunrise paint the peaks gold and pink. 6 months had passed since that desperate night when he'd nearly died in the snow. 6 months of healing, working, and learning to love again. Today he would marry Emma Fletcher in a ceremony as simple and honest as the life they'd built together. "You look like a man about to face a firing squad," Ezra rumbled, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. Jake accepted the cup gratefully, just thinking about how different everything is from what I planned a year ago. Different better or different worse? Jake's smile was answer enough. Better. So much better. I sometimes wonder if I'm dreaming. "Dreams don't leave calluses on your hands or teach you to gentle wild horses," Ezra observed. "What you've got here is real as mountain stone, son." They'd invited the few neighbors within a day's ride. Old Pete Sampson and his wife from the next valley over, the Methodist circuit preacher who happened to be passing through, and Tom Bradley, the supply store owner from the nearest settlement. Simple folk who understood that love was worth celebrating, even in the wilderness. Emma emerged from the cabin wearing her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her mountain-strong frame. The ivory silk seemed to glow against her auburn hair, and wildflowers crowned her head like something from a fairy tale. Jake's breath caught in his throat. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. "She's beautiful, ain't she?" Ezra's voice carried decades of love and loss. "Her mama looked just like that on our wedding day." He clapped Jake on the shoulder. "You take care of my girl, Jake Morrison, with my life." The ceremony was everything Jake had hoped for. Simple, honest, filled with the kind of joy that comes from choosing love over fear. Preacher Williams spoke about commitment and faith, while the mountain wind blessed their union and eagles circled overhead like divine witnesses. "Do you, Jake Morrison, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part?" Jake's voice rang clear across the meadow. "I do," Do you, Emma Fletcher, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part? Emma's green eyes sparkled with unshed tears of joy. I do. As Jake leaned down to kiss his bride, the sound of approaching horses cut through the celebration. 8 riders emerged from the tree line, their faces hard and their intentions unclear. Jake felt Emma tense beside him, but he squeezed her hand reassuringly. The lead rider was a man Jake recognized with a sinking heart, Cal Brennan, foreman of the Double Bar Ranch, and one of the men who'd been present when Jake lost everything. Well, well, Brennan drawled, dismounting slowly. Jake Morrison. Heard you were dead. Disappointed? Jake stepped slightly in front of Emma, his body language casual but ready. Depends. Brennan's eyes traveled over the assembled wedding party. See, we got word that a certain cowboy who owes money to certain people has been hiding out up here playing house. Ezra moved to Jake's other side, his massive presence radiating threat. You're not welcome here, mister. This is a private celebration. Nothing private about a man who runs out on his debts, another rider called out. Jake felt heat rise in his chest, but Emma's hand on his arm kept him steady. I don't owe anybody anything, Brennan. Lost everything fair and square when the bank called in the loan. Funny thing about that, Brennan smiled coldly. Turns out some of those cattle that got rustled have been showing up at market with the brands altered. Someone's been selling Morrison beef and keeping the profits. The accusation hung in the mountain air like poison. Jake felt every eye on him, his new wife, her father, their few guests, and 8 hostile strangers who'd ridden up here looking for trouble. How you calling me a rustler? Jake's voice was deadly quiet. I'm calling you a thief who staged his own losses to avoid paying his debts, and now you're up here living high while honest folks go unpaid. Emma stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. My husband is the most honest man I've ever known. If you have accusations to make them to the sheriff with proof. Your husband? Brennan laughed harshly. Lady, you just married a criminal. That was the line too far. Jake moved faster than thought, his fist connecting with Brennan's jaw with a satisfying crack. The foreman went down hard, but his men were already reaching for their guns. Enough! Ezra's roar echoed off the mountains. His rifle appeared in his hands as if by magic, and Jake noticed that Pete Sampson had armed himself as well. Even Preacher Williams was holding a shotgun that had materialized from somewhere. You boys are outnumbered, Ezra said conversationally. And you're on my land, disturbing my daughter's wedding. I suggest you collect your friend there and ride out before this gets unpleasant. Brennan climbed to his feet, spitting blood. This ain't over, Morrison. Yes, it is, Jake said firmly. Whatever happened to my cattle, I wasn't part of it. But I'm part of this mountain now and these people. You want to come after me, you'll have to go through them first. Emma took his hand again, her touch steady and sure. We stand together. All of us, Pete Sampson added, his rifle still trained on the unwelcome visitors. Brennan's eyes traveled over the assembled defenders, mountain folk who'd clearly chosen sides. His jaw worked like he wanted to say more, but practicality won out. Let's go, boys, this ain't worth dying over. As the 8 riders disappeared back into the timber, Jake felt the last weight of his old life lift from his shoulders. Whatever shadows had followed him up the mountain were gone now, blown away by the wind and the unwavering loyalty of people who'd chosen to believe in him. Well, Preacher Williams said cheerfully, tucking his shotgun away, that was more excitement than I usually see at weddings. Shall we finish the ceremony? Jake turned to Emma, seeing her pride and love shining in her green eyes. Mrs. Morrison, he said softly. Mr. Morrison, she replied, rising on her toes to kiss him again. As the sun climbed higher over the peaks and their friends gathered around to offer congratulations, Jake Morrison knew he'd found something worth more than any ranch, any herd, any treasure the world could offer. He'd found home, and no one would ever take that away from him again.